Hey, LAWsome listeners. Matt Smyers and I just came off of a conversation with Michael Seeley's with Spear Investigations. And, there's so many, I'll say, ancillary areas of services that support a law firm. And it's fascinating. The joy of this podcast is introduced us to some really unique angles and how they support law firms. And this is definitely one of those. I think you're going to be fascinated just with the concept of being able to not always have to lean on your staff. If there are certain things you've leaned on paralegals or in-house support for in the past, this may open your mind up to new perspective. And I think that's really the name of the game, is to always challenge the status quo. Matt, what do you think they're going to pick up from this discussion?
Yeah, like you said, Tanner, this is one of those areas, the supportive areas of law firms that, I'm not very familiar with. So fascinating to hear from Mike how they undertake their investigations, the type of information that they're able to gather, how fast they're able to gather the information, and just how incredibly valuable that information can be to the outcome of a lawsuit. So great conversation, really enjoyed it, and hope our listeners do as well.
Yeah, we hope you enjoy. And if you haven't, we encourage you to subscribe to the podcast. Make sure you're staying in tune with all the upcoming speakers and innovators that we're talking to in the legal space over the coming months. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another LAWsome episode. I'm your host, Tanner Jones, along with my co-host, Matt Smyers. We're kicking off this episode with Michael Seeley. We've had the fortune of meeting Mike through Bob Simon's Justice HQ program. Mike is the co-founder of Spear Investigations, and today's topic is what you don't know can hurt your case, the power of digital investigation. Welcome, Mike.
I appreciate it. Thanks, Tanner. Thanks, Matt. Appreciate you guys for having me on. Looking forward to chatting a little bit, having a good time.
Absolutely. Yeah, this is a unique topic for the LAWsome podcast. So, but before we dive into some specifics around legal investigation work, let's start with your background. What's your story? What did you to this line of work?
First of all, I want to say, hey, I'm not a private investigator. That is not my claim to fame. My company, Spear Investigations, we work with other licensed private investigators around the country. Those guys do great work. It's a great profession, but we kind of manage and market their services to plaintiff attorneys. We strictly work on the plaintiff side of the business. That's kind of how we get into it. But I always try to lay out, hey, I'm not a private investigator. I'm not sneaking around, hiding in bushes, taking pictures of people. That's not what we do. We do something a little bit different than that. But I have kind of a unique background to get to this point. I was in medical device sales for over 20 years, sold spinal implants, pain pumps, orthobiologics, and had my own distributorship. Worked for some large companies and had my own distributorship towards the end of my career in that path. And I had a recruiter reach out to me one day and said, hey, you know anything about the legal field? I was like, well, not really. He said, well, there's a medical funding company, and we're trying to find somebody that has a medical background that knows doctors, knows facilities, and we'll teach you the legal side of it. So I stepped into this world and about 8 years ago and really haven't looked back. Started off in the funding business. As you know, there's lots of funding companies in the legal field. I was there for about 5 years with a couple of different companies. Had a pretty good run there, but learned a lot and met a lot of great people. That's where I met my business partner. He's based out of Atlanta, and he and I teamed up about 3 years ago to start Spear Investigations. And we work on the plaintiff side of the legal field, and we deliver digital investigation services to plaintiff attorneys to strengthen their cases, help them win, and ultimately add value to those cases.
The long and winding road to where you are now, right?
Man, I'm telling you, I was like, keep it short here, and then I just rambled on for like 5 minutes.
Not at all. It's always great to have that perspective and that background of where our guests come from. So, let's dive in. Let's start with, for attorneys who may not have worked with outside investigation services before, what kind of situations warrant bringing in outside expertise?
And I'm going to flip over and answer that kind of with an example. My wife is a nurse by training, and right now she's a healthcare executive with a healthcare tech company. But when she was more in the nursing side of business, she always said, operate at the top of your license. And that's the kind of the same message that we want to pass along to our attorneys. You can do some of this work, But is really that really the best use of your time? Is that the best use of your in-house investigative team doing these type of searches that we provide? We kind of act as a force multiplier in this field. You can employ us to come in and handle some of these large volumes of investigations and not bog down your staff in kind of your normal everyday process. And that's where we really feel like we kind of make the difference. And, like I said before, we work with licensed private investigators nationwide, and they're able to get into some databases and have access to things that the general public, including attorneys, do not have access to just because of their licensure. So that's really kind of the deciding factor.
Heard you reference the phrase digital warfare. What do you mean by that?
Absolutely. Just like yourselves, in the kind of legal service provider space, we want to help these attorneys win. These people fight the good fight, and they're representing, individuals that have been injured by large companies or, and large insurance companies. They're fighting against these people, and we want to step in and be part of that fight. Now, we wanted something that sounded aggressive because that's the way we like to handle our business. So, I started off, I was an advertising major, so I'm always coming up quick to come up with a motto or a phrase, and that just kind of hit me one day. We came up because we were like, hey, let's get in a battle with these guys and really see how we can help these attorneys win.
Yeah, no doubt. And naturally, I mean, like any case, there's so many complexities. This is certainly one angle that can, in some instances, make or break a case. I want to dive in a little bit more specifically, Mike, into the area where a law firm may consider, okay, well, I have paralegals, or I have, in-house admin staff, and I've generally leaned on them for X, Y, and Z. I'd love to hear kind of where does it make sense to hand over to a more skilled professional in this respect? As you've already referenced, you haven't said it directly, but putting people in place to do their highest and best use work in a law firm, generally that means, that's working, pushing cases through within a law firm and helping more clients. But where you come in, where does that balance fall in terms of being able to really hand something off to an outside support?
I think it comes down to, having your people do what they've always done, right? I mean, everybody has somebody they say in the firm, they're like, oh, I've got a paralegal, and they can dig up all kinds of stuff. If you dug up for a whole year, you're not going to be able to locate the things that we can find in some of our searches. Yeah, you might be able to find some of the things that we come across, but the volume and the precision that we're able to deliver is something that you just don't have access to. I don't have access to it outside of, the contracts that I have with the investigators that we work with. I've tried to look things up, and quite frankly, you can't find them. I mean, it's designed to some of these things are public records, but so much of it is designed to be difficult to find. It's hard to overturn the right rocks and find these little crumbs that we're looking for. So that's where, we can come in and augment your staff and keep them, working at the top of their game in the areas that they specifically know, and let us take some of the burden over, finding, 100 former employees that used to work for this company that you may have a case against. That's one of the biggest products that we do is former employee searches. We find people that we operate outside the normal discovery process, and we find former employees that are not protected by, employment agreements. They don't have NDAs, and they're able to provide all kinds of insight into these companies behind the scenes. If an attorney's ever said, wow, I wish I had somebody that worked there that could give me this information. Well, that's where we step in and we deliver these types of insiders. And that's another thing that we do is give you the opportunity to invest in an insider.
Where have you seen any examples that come to mind in terms of where an investigator's findings have significantly either increased the value of the case or maybe even the strength, the winnability of the case? And,
as I start to say these out loud, I have to kind of be careful to cover up certain things because we've had let's just say a construction case, we're a large, industrial, like building a giant building, like a skyscraper type thing. And there's an individual that is, he's run over by a piece of equipment on the job. and they had multiple camera angles of this individual being, basically crushed. And this is an attorney that we're talking to, and we don't have a relationship with him. And I'm trying to be honest and upfront with him. I'm like, I'm not sure that you need us for this case. You have what you've told us sounds like an open and shut case. You've got 3 different angles of this individual getting, run over by this vehicle. And he said, well, what the difference is, I'm trying to take this case from negligence and increase the value of it. He goes, maybe it's a $2 or $3 million case right now, but I want to prove by talking to former employees that they had a history of this. They had a history of not drug testing these individuals. The individual that ran over this guy too he had marijuana in his system, cocaine, and opioids. So, and he's operating a piece of heavy equipment. So, we can go in and talk to people that may have worked with this individual. Hey, tell us about your time working with XYZ company. What was it like? What were they doing as far as drug testing? What were the safety procedures on the job? Yeah, that's great. The manual says this, but what really happened behind the scenes? Were they following that letter by letter? No, we actually did it this way because nobody wanted to do that way. And he was able to take the case from what he perceived to be a $2 to $3 million case to about a $9 million case. So he went from negligence to gross negligence, and that was the big jump, and that's why they were using us.
I'm curious, Mike. Information being useful or maybe even juicy sometimes is one thing. It being admissible is something altogether different. How much interaction is there with your investigators and the attorneys when it comes to the gathering of information to make sure that it's either gathered or presented or protected in the right way to make sure that it's something that's actually usable in court?
Yeah, thanks, Matt. That's a great question. So we, I've said former employee searches a few times, right? So that's one of the main things that we focus on is former employee searches. When we return one of these searches to an attorney, it's a name, it's a tenure, how long were they there at the job, a specific job title that they're looking for, and a verified contact information. So we can take that list, we call that, the list, super creative, I know, and we can either pass that off to the attorney, and that's theirs to do with as they please, to work within the, their system, or we offer an interviewing service as well. And when that comes out, we create a custom list of questions with the aid of the attorney and say, hey, give us somewhere between 6 to 10 questions you want worked into a conversation. As you may know, not everybody wants to speak to an attorney over the phone. When these people get phone calls from them, they typically think that they're in trouble somehow. So we want to relieve that pressure, create a very open and comfortable, make them feel comfortable talking to us. We tell them, given the guidance by the attorney, we can mention the case. We don't have to mention the case. This is outside of the normal discovery process, right? We're just kind of gathering our facts and our information. So we put all this information together. The last thing we want to do is, like you mentioned, is create a fatigue maybe with talking too much to this client. There could be, or this former employee, there could be something that's said or how they say it that may be valuable to the attorney or the case. So, the ultimate goal of those questions is to get them to agree to speak to the attorney or a member of their staff. And that's when we hand them off and say, hey, we talked to this gentleman today. You need to get hold of him within the next 24 hours. He's ready to talk to somebody. He's comfortable. He hasn't talked to his wife about it or 3 or 4 of his coworkers. He wants to talk to you right now. So pick up the phone and call this guy if you're truly interested in finding out what you asked me to find out for you, because this guy's ready to talk. Don't wait a month to talk to him. Call him within the next 24 hours. That's our recommendation. And they do, and they usually get great information. Now, those people, they can be deposed. They can be turned into experts for their side. There's lots of different, they can just use that insight to have, that little peek into the window of what goes on kind of behind closed doors.
Technology, right? It's changed how all of us work, and the legal space is no exception. How has technology impacted what your investigators do?
I think the speed at which things turn around, nobody's getting in their car, driving to the courthouse to pull hard copies of records. These things are everything's digital. For the most part, it can be turned around pretty quickly. You don't necessarily have to have that boots on the ground presence, somebody following somebody around. I mean, there's a place for that for sure in certain situations, but that's a very high level practice. We're kind of more of a shotgun approach. We can get pretty wide and use the technology that we have and the speed. Some of these searches, I mean, we're finding at the low end, maybe 25 people, and at the very, very high end, we may find 100 individuals, that were former employees of this company. I mean, you imagine how long that would take for you or me to sit down and verify that when it can be done with a few keystrokes. We turn these investigations around in 5 to 10 business days, kind of depending on the complexity and just how busy we are. I get a lot of times people call and say, hey, we always ask, do you have any deadlines that are pending? Well, I'm glad you asked. I've got a deposition in a week. Well, if we can work within that, then we will. But we want to turn it around as quick as possible so that, everything just happens faster, I guess.
Yeah, that was one of my questions as well, is how often do you get called upon to get involved and undertake an investigation late in the game in litigation?
I would probably too much. No, it doesn't happen all that often. Sometimes it happens. I wish I could put my finger on it and say, hey, they always call at the beginning, they always call in the middle, or they always call at the end. It's actually spread out. It's pretty even across the board. It depends on kind of maybe when they hear about us or remember us. Maybe they saw us at a conference somewhere. They're like, hey, what's that guy's name that we talked to a year ago in New Orleans? And they have to find us. So that's why things like this, the eyeballs and the opportunity to tell our story are so important, because we have to stay in everybody's front of everybody's mind. Our busiest customers, they may use us a couple of dozen times a year, and that's it. I don't have somebody that calls me every week from the same firm. So eyes and ears and people using our name in rooms that we aren't in are invaluable to us. I mean, we're still a small business at this point.
What's one of the maybe unasked question that should be asked in this discussion around your area of business?
Yeah, that's a good one too. I think that not necessarily what they're not asking, it's what they're not providing. Like, hey, we need to know as many facts about the case as possible up front. Give me as much information. Give me a small summary of the case. Let's have a good conversation. If you just text me and say, hey, I'm looking for former employees of Texaco in Texas, I'm like, that's a pretty big net. I need to kind of dial down a little bit more than that. And so having a really good communication is really, really important. A good synopsis of the case, the facts, what you're looking for. We don't want to send you, if you have a truck, we do a lot of trucking cases. So maybe you have a big trucking case and you're wanting to talk to individuals that are, obviously truck drivers. You're talking to people maybe with that are maintaining these vehicles. You're talking to people that are dispatchers, loading vehicles. It's not going to necessarily do you a great deal of good to talk to a bunch of people maybe that work in the corporate office, right? So we don't want to muddy the waters by bringing in too much of the wrong type of people. So really, really good communication about what you actually need and where you want us to focus on. That's really the key to a good investigation.
Mike, we appreciate you being willing to jump on the LAWsome show and share with our listeners what opportunities are out there for them in bettering their cases.
I appreciate it.
What's the best way for listeners to find you online?
LinkedIn. It's pretty big on LinkedIn. Mike Seeley, we have a space there. And also Spear Investigations, we have a spot on LinkedIn as well. We have a website, spearinvestigations.com. Spear, like you're throwing a spear at someone. Again, staying with that kind of, weaponized version kind of names when something sounded a little aggressive. And then, M. Seeley at spearinvestigations.com is my email as well.
Well, thanks so much for joining.